Hello, welcome to Writing at the Edge's latest webinar. And this time we're going to be talking about something very contentious indeed. It's artificial intelligence, or AI, and the part it might play in writing. Now, my name is Jason Mann.
And I'm Keith Rossiter. We're going to be looking at three separate angles on the AI question. Should AI companies be allowed free access to the work of writers, artists, filmmakers, and other creatives? Is it okay to use AI to do the work that humans have traditionally done in the way of creativity? And finally, what other uses can we put AI to that are outside the creative sphere?
So we do have differences of opinion on some of these issues.
Don't we arm wrestle to start with and see who wins?
So do expect a few fireworks during our debate today. The debate that's currently generating the most hot air is the first of those ones you mentioned, I think, Keith, isn't it? Which is, in the media and that, which is should AI companies be allowed free access to the work of writers, artists, filmmakers, actors? And I think it's true to say there are legal actions taking place. In the US, for example, I think the New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft, I think.
And Perplexity, which uses the AI model, the OpenAI model. It is definitely, and the British government is wrestling now with whether to go down the open system that the Americans have got, which is take what you want, guys, it's the Wild West. There's a big lobby in this country among creative industries to say that we need some more protection for creators. It's too late to have any say in the consultation that the government did, which ended in February. But they're now working on proposals for the final bill. So if you have strong feelings, lobby your MP. And I'll say that again at the end to remind you.
Thanks very much. And so let's get straight into the subject now and talk about some of the issues that we can see that are occurring now, but are also going to incur in the future as well. Let me ask you a question, Keith, to start with. What are your red lines with AI?
Well, I have very few red lines because it seems to me a bit pointless to have red lines that you can't do anything about. I think we both agree that there should be copyright protection for authors, that if the AI companies want to use our work to train their models, they need to pay something to us. They shouldn't have it for free.
I agree with you. I think copyright is one that we are definitely in agreement on. And what else?
So we can move on from that issue, but AI is here to stay. It's not going to go away no matter how much noise we make. And, I think we're strongly on different sides of this argument, you and I. I think, well, if the public ends up liking what the AI models produce, that's bad news for us, but it isn't bad news for the readers, for the people who look at artwork. If they like it, they like it. And what can we do about that?
So, yeah, I agree that the genie is out the bottle. It's not going to be put back in the bottle. Certainly, there is no doubt that AI is here to stay, and it will undoubtedly have a growing impact on all kinds of aspects of our lives, many of them very, very good. I can see all sorts of examples in the medical profession and things like that. So my concern is not about AI generally. I can certainly see that AI can be a great boon to writers in certain areas such as research. That can be a really useful area. But where I draw the line is other examples where, for example, AI is being used for something like generating ideas for stories. Now, to me, that is something that is the job of the writer. And if somebody is asking a machine to come up with ideas, and I suspect also probably helping them write the story as well, can they honestly call themselves a novelist?
No, probably not. And I don't use it that way, and I know you don't, because I enjoy the process of coming up with ideas and of doing the writing. And that's not an issue. I mean, I wouldn't dream of asking ChatGPT or any of the other Perplexity or any of the other models to do my job for me. Otherwise, I'd just go and do something else. Yeah.
But I think it's true to say that we've both heard stories of AI being used sometimes in those ways.
Exactly. And I have a friend who recently came back from a trip to West Bengal, and she looked for a travel book and didn't find very many. And the one she ordered in the end, when it arrived, she discovered it said in the small print at the back that it had been written by ChatGPT. And she said it was pretty rubbishy. So for now, anyway, that is a consolation for us that it's not doing a very good job. But as one of the experts in the field said, bear in mind, this is the worst it's ever going to be. So it's only going to get better.
I think that's right. I mean, that's my concern. I mean, I've seen one or two examples of books produced by AI, and to be honest, they're not very good at all. But the technology is developing very, very rapidly indeed. And I think what we're seeing today compared to what we'll see in 5 or 10 years' time will look very mundane and rudimentary, I think, compared to what is coming. I mean, you only have to look at some examples in the past of things like, for example, computers being used to play chess. I mean, the example for me is Garry Kasparov in 1996. He played the computer, I think it was called Deep Mind. He won his first segment of games. He then came back and played a second segment of games the following year against the same computer, and it beat him. So that's how much it had advanced. And I think the technology, nobody really knows where the technology is going to go and how much more powerful it's going to become. I mean, we all know it's going to be hugely powerful, but exactly how it will play out, I don't think anybody really knows, even the supposed experts.
I'm glad you mentioned the chess because, yes, it did beat Garry Kasparov, who was the world champion, but it hasn't killed chess. Have you noticed that? In fact, chess is more popular than ever. We had a really top hit film on chess. There's now even a chess program on BBC TV. Have you seen that? They've got, it's kind of reality TV almost. They get 6 or 8 chess players and they compete on film while we're watching, and people are watching it. So no, AI hasn't killed chess.
I think my worry is, though, that with something like chess, you have usually 2 people sitting across each other a board, and therefore it's very clear that you're competing against another human. So that is absolutely clear. I mean, when you have chess competitions, they go to a huge amount of trouble to make sure those people haven't got something secreted on them, for example, which allows them to use AI. So there you can clearly see they are competing against humans. I think that's much less clear with something like book writing. And therefore, I think there is a real danger there that material that is AI generated will pass under the radar and I think will not be detected. I mean, we assume that everybody is going to own up to using AI. I don't think we can do that, actually, because there will always, if whatever system you have of anything, there will always be some people who take advantage of it and don't necessarily own up to the full truth about it. My feeling about it really is that I understand there are benefits to AI and certainly things like research, but if it actually results in stifling human creativity, I mean, the worst case scenario I could see in a few years' time could be, but who knows, could be vast amounts of AI generated material being created. And that, therefore, the production by people is going to be quite difficult to sometimes identify. I mean, knowing we were having this conversation today, I went on to ChatGPT and I asked it, I said, could you tell an AI generated story from one that's not AI generated? And it answered, first of all, it said, yes, I think I could, because things like the depth of characters, there won't be the emotional depth and things like that in an AI generated version. Although that's today, we don't know in 5 years' time. But then it went on to say, quite interestingly, however, if something was created by AI, a story, and then a skilled writer edited it, it would be almost indistinguishable, was the words it used, being able to tell that from a traditionally written story. So I think one of my great worries is actually, I'm sure people want to have ethical standards about using AI, but is there ever going to be a system that really truly identifies some of those examples? And if you can't police the system, I think it's a very worrying area. I mean, you only have to look at other things in the world that have happened using technology. And the technology to identify the transgressions sometimes always seems to be, a step behind the transgressors. And I think that is a very worrying area. If you can't police the system, I do think it could be very damaging to the creativity of writers.
You've given me quite a lot to take on there, so I hope I remember all your points. but what I would say is cheats have always been with us. Long before computers existed, we had cheats to deal with. That's just a fact of life. And sometimes cheats get away with it, like Lance Armstrong did for quite a long time. I'm not that worried about it because I'm not pessimistic about human creativity. I think human creativity will always find a new avenue. It hurts for us, you and I, as writers, the idea that human writers might one day not exist, at least for novels. But the novel in its modern form is not some force of nature. It's only been around since the early 17th century with Don Quixote. And if it goes away, well, it'll hurt us, but will it hurt anyone else? Probably not. And I feel excited, if I'm honest. I feel sad for us that we're having to fight this tide. It's more than a tide, isn't it? Because a tide always goes back. This is a flood. But I feel excited that we're entering a whole new era. I think history will look back on 2025 to 2035 probably and say, this was when a whole new paradigm of creativity was invented. And it probably won't be crusty old folks like us who do it. It'll be youngsters, perhaps even the ones who are not yet born. Somebody will come up and say, like Cervantes, and say, I'm going to do this new thing, and it will take off. It'll be somebody like Gutenberg who created movable type and transformed the whole world. And it's sad for us, and we'll miss it. But I'm not pessimistic about humanity.
But taking the writing as an example here,
Yeah.
because that is what we're discussing, if we're going to leave it to computers to actually write the stories, to create the ideas, to do everything about the story, really, where does that leave? What is there left to be creative for a writer? Are you saying that writers have become extinct then, human writers? Because I don't see, if you're allowing the computer to do everything, basically come up with the ideas, dream up everything, where is the creativity left for the human?
I don't know is the answer. If I knew, I'd invent it, and then I'd be the hero of the world, wouldn't I? My name would go down in history like Cervantes. But I don't know. I don't know is the answer. In the meantime, I don't think we should be hand-wringing about the threat as we perceive it, because that negative idea feeds out into the public domain and makes people look on us negatively. Oh, yeah, they're going the way of the dinosaur. I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be saying, okay, AI can produce books. They're not as good as ours. They don't have soul yet. Who knows what will happen in the future? But it's quite clear that AI generated writing lacks just that spark of humanity. So we should be saying to the public, we should be saying, be prepared to pay a premium for human, genuine, good, human created work. And I think, you know, if you look back at in the recent past, Spotify changed the whole way music is consumed, didn't it? And so now, of course, the top stars like Taylor Swift continue to make a fortune, but people who once might have made a decent living from selling their music to people who wanted to actually literally buy it and have it in their hand, they can't do it anymore. It's all streamed. They make such a tiny amount of money. They've had to find other ways of doing it, and one of those ways is performance. So maybe the writers who will survive and thrive in this era will be the performance ones, the ones who are prepared to write something great and then go in front of an audience and perform that and read it to the public.
So I suppose I'd have two issues with that. The first one I would say is that just because you're a good public performer doesn't make you a great writer. And some of the best writers in the world are people who are quite private people who probably don't perform necessarily publicly particularly well. So what you're potentially doing, I can see, is potentially shutting off those people who might be the greatest writers in the world because they're not public performers. So I think that could be a danger. You know, writing is not just about standing in front of a group of people or standing in a theatre or whatever. It's often a very solitary occupation, frankly, sitting in a room in front of a computer, or maybe writing in some cases, physically writing, and actually coming up with a story that comes from your mind. And I think that has always been the beauty of writing for me, writing fictional novels, is that I've been able to put something down on paper that has come from my imagination. And I think the worry for me is that what AI is going to do is take away some of that magic. So I really do think that is a danger. I think the other aspect I would challenge with you is the assumption that people who are readers will know what they're reading is AI generated if it is. And that is one of the issues I have, because the reality is, like we were talking about earlier, it actually is going to become very, very difficult to identify those cases. You could, not just because you might have something totally AI generated that in a few years' time could be a lot more sophisticated, but you could have, like I was saying earlier, an example where AI has generated a story and then it is edited by a human, and therefore makes it much more difficult. So I suspect we both agree on one thing, and that is that in theory, AI generated material should be clearly marked.
For our benefit, it should be, but not necessarily for the reader's benefit, because the fact is, you know, history is merciless, isn't it? So the history doesn't care whether you or I succeed as writers. And all that matters in the end, the only reason we do manage to sell books and carry on doing it is because there are people who like what we wrote. If ChatGPT or some other model writes something that's as good or better than we can, do you know what? That's just bad luck for us. We need to up our game, make even better books. And so maybe actually end result will be that there'll be fewer human-generated books than there are now. And I think there's something like 1 million a year published already. So maybe that's way too many. And that ChatGPT and other AI models will sort the wheat from the chaff. So you know what? History doesn't care if we don't succeed. And yes, okay, so we have this ability to be creative. It's fantastic. But some peasant in Bangladesh who spends their whole day from dawn till well past dusk trying to scratch a living, they might be the most wonderful storyteller that ever lived. They haven't got time to sit down and write a novel. So is that fair on them? Should we be out there seeking out those disempowered storytellers and helping them to write?
Well, I think that's what, to some extent, the publishing industry tries to do. It does try and find people out there with new voices. They make a lot of effort of doing that. I mean, my argument on that would be 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I think what I worry is that rather than sorting the wheat from the chaff in human writing, what you're going to get potentially instead is a blizzard of AI generated writing, which people are going to have very difficulty, identifying. For me, creativity is the essence of being a human. If you take that away from a person, if you take that creativity away, which is potentially what you're doing for a lot of people with AI, then I think that is just hugely damaging to humankind, frankly, let alone writers.
But what proportion of the human population writes novels? The tiniest amount. So we can't dismiss those 99.999% of humanity who don't express their creativity through writing novels, can we? So if they lose us, that's tough, but on us, but it doesn't kill creativity, and I don't believe it ever will. I think whatever technology achieves, human creativity will rise above it.
But I wonder where human creativity goes. So let's just take it away from writing for a minute. We're talking about writers because we're writers. But really, the truth is that people can be creative in all sorts of ways. You know, a farmer working in India or UK, they can be creative in their own way, in their own work. It might not be in writing. It might be in something else. Or you could have somebody who's an inventor, or developing something. Now, those areas too are ultimately, there is going to be an impact of AI on those areas as well. It's not just going to be writing. Writing is just the example we're talking about. The reality is it's going to affect everybody's lives in a lesser or greater extent.
I think the thing that generates fear is that word intelligence, artificial intelligence. And it's my opinion that it's a very clever marketing trick, because I don't believe it is intelligent, and I don't think it ever will be. But it's quite sexy to say artificial intelligence. It makes us think of science fiction in a way. But I think there is an ultimate limit to what this can achieve. I think it rides like a parasite on the back of human creativity. So I'm not worried at all about that. I think instead of trying to lay down laws that say you have to identify everything written with the help of AI, we should be trumpeting the fact that we've written without the help of AI. And I think that's the way to get through to the public, to say, look, this book's special because it was written entirely by a human being without any outside assistance, apart from technical. I'm not saying you shouldn't use AI to have an admin assistant or a research assistant. But the ideas that come from you should trumpet those. So don't worry about laws to rein in, because they will always cheat, won't they? Instead, trumpet your own value.
But I do think you need standards. And I think really, if people are going to, if something's produced like a book by a human, it's written by them and there's no significant involvement with AI, we're really just turning it round, aren't we? Instead of requiring the AI to identify themselves, we're actually turning it round to say the human can say, well, this is not AI. So I'm wondering if there's any difference in that. You're just approaching how to do it in a different way. So that the important thing, I think, is that people can differentiate between, so people know what they're buying. I do think that's very important for whatever the item is. People really do need to know what they're buying. And I think with writing, if there's been a novel that's been largely generated by AI, I do think it's because you're still going to put a name on that book, the chances are, of an author. Well, that author probably won't exist. So there's a deceit there, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about this, about cheating earlier, didn't we? And AI and people who use it will always cheat. And you're fighting a losing battle if you think you can constantly stay ahead of the cheats. You can't. They will invent some new technique, and you will then be running to catch up. Governments move much more slowly than cheats, is the truth. So the only way to do it, in my opinion, is to flip that on its head. The way athletes do, we can go down the motorway at 100 miles an hour if there are no cops or speed cameras around. But that doesn't mean that we're not prepared to pay decent money to go and watch a man or a woman running around a racetrack, are we? We'll still do it because it's special, because we recognize that as being human. You don't need to say on every car, not a human athlete, because we kind of know it. We look at it and it's not human.
But say there were there are androids that could be looked exactly like humans, but were specifically designed to be brilliant runners, and they couldn't be identified, and they could be put in races with humans, and of course they would win easily, potentially in that case, maybe if they were sufficiently advanced. But that wouldn't be fair, would it?
It wouldn't be fair, but there's something that in robotics they refer to as the uncanny valley. I don't know if you've come across that concept. It's that something that is almost but not quite human makes us very uncomfortable. And I think ChatGPT and other AI models produce work, creative work, if you might want to put it like that, creative, that is in that uncanny valley. It's not quite right, is it? It doesn't, I don't think in my lifetime, I can't see it matching up to any of the greatest writers. Yeah, sure, there are writers who churn out novels like one every 3 months and flog them for peanuts online. And I'm sure AI will put them out of business, or they will be competing. I think AI will force us as writers, long before some new young generation comes along and invents a whole new kind of creativity that we can't imagine. But it will force you and I to write better books, to strive to be among the best.
So let me take you an example. My book here, The Echoing Shore, that took me a year to write. I went on to ChatGPT. It's about 80,000 words. And I said to ChatGPT, all I said was, how long would it take you to write an 80,000 word manuscript for a novel? And it came back and it said anything between a few minutes and a few hours, depending on whether you just wanted a rough draft or a polished version. So that can produce, and I'm not saying it at the moment, of course it's not as good as hopefully my book or any other human's book, because it's still in its infancy in many respects. But in a few years I don't really doubt that they might not, even in the fullness of time, might not be the greatest books ever written. But I do believe that AI will develop to such an extent that it will be able to produce a passable novel. And if they can produce a passable novel in seconds or minutes, then where does that leave human writers who really, for me, a lot of the joy of writing is actually working hard to try and come up with those ideas, to try and make them fit together into the story. And it's hard work and it takes a long time. If a machine can do that in minutes or seconds, it kind of demeans, I think, some of the work that I'm doing.
You used the word there, that's a really important word, that it could produce a passable novel. Well, yes, probably it will. Probably within 5 years it'll be producing passable novels, but will it produce a work of genius, a work of real creativity? I mean, so many novels published now are just formulaic. They tell the same old stories in different ways. But the stories that live, that survive, are the ones that are told in ways you or I or ChatGPT could never predict. And I think that's going to help. I think it's going to actually help improve human creativity, not hinder it.
But don't you think the danger is that those gems, those real diamonds in the rough, are going to be lost in the blizzard of literature that potentially could come from AI?
They will be lost if we have a doom and gloom approach. We've got to say, this is great, we're great. You know, we're humans, we're not machines. So read our books if you want to find something with a spark of soul in it.
Yeah, it's one of those areas, I guess, where I don't think we're ever going to completely agree on this, to be honest.
Like
but
we can arm wrestle properly later.
Yes,
on.
absolutely.
I'm sure I'll win.
and I, yeah.
No, it's not.
Oh,
fair.
I'm sure
you're
will.
a triathlete, so it's not really fair.
But yeah, I think it is an area where really nobody knows where it's going to go.
No.
And I mean, the amount of people in the past who predicted technology and got it laughably wrong. Frankly,
absolutely.
It's like the mayor in an American town who stood up and stood in front of a crowd and said, "I can see a day when every town in America will have a telephone." So now it looks laughable, doesn't it? But you know, in a 50 years' time, who knows where this technology is going to go?
And also our mindsets change, because I can well remember a few decades ago talk about telephones where you could actually see the person you were talking to. And I can well remember thinking to myself, I don't want that. Now I'm on it all the time. You know, it's my whole mindset has changed. And I think people's mindsets do change.
So shall we sum up what our views are?
Yeah. Okay.
And take it from there. I mean, my view is very much really that, yes, I know AI is here to stay.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. We all have to accept it. The genie's out the bottle, and that's fair enough. And it does offer huge potential in all kinds of different walks of life. I don't want to be negative from that point of view. It can certainly be a very useful tool for writers or all kinds of other things. But where I draw the line is where it's actually generating those stories. Because for me, creation is the basic tool of the writer. And if you take that away or you dilute it, I think you do huge amount of damage, not just to writing, frankly, as I say, but people's imagination. Because people's imagination and creativity improves with actually doing those things. We get better at them. If people aren't doing them, they're not going to ever develop that much further.
Well, you're quite right in some ways, so I'm going to agree with you on that. But what I would say is there's nothing we can do about it, so we have to actually find ways around the obstacle. You know, ChatGPT is what it is. You can go back a few years before you could publish books online the way one can now, and there were far fewer novels written. Suddenly there was this flood of stuff that anyone could create a novel and put it online. It could be the biggest rubbish. And that might be true of ChatGPT and other AI models, but I think we have to celebrate human creativity, to believe that whatever happens, humans will always, their creativity will always rise to the surface. And, you know, novels, as I said, novels haven't been around forever. They didn't come onto the planet with humans. They were invented in the early 17th century, and they can just as easily be uninvented. And different ways of, they're all about storytelling. Novels, films, radio plays, theatre. That's all about storytelling. And I think humans will always look for ways to tell stories. Maybe storytelling in person will thrive.
I suppose the one thing we can hope is that whatever happens with AI, that there are some clear guidelines. Well, I hope that, and that they can be enforced. And I'm skeptical about that, as you will have gathered from what I've said earlier. But I do think that it is very important to have real standards, if possible, enforced as well.
So I think the only red line that I would draw is about paying people for the use of their work. So, and I think that's the only one that can be enforced. There will always be cheats who get around any ethical standards you try to lay down. But the one thing that can be enforced is if governments, not just ours, but all the governments, say if AI want to use copyrighted material, those companies have to pay the creators something. And that's the only thing I would really dig my heels in over.
So perhaps we should end it there on agreements, and we'll
Yeah.
finish that arm wrestling competition, Keith. Yes.